We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspired Change with Gunter. If your organisation cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self-development and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspired Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number 1 in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to Miranda Spiegner-Sapon, our showrunner and executive producer. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. That's me, and before we get going, I want to just state that whatever I'm presenting here are essentially my views, and they're my own views, although they're based on academic and empirical research, and as well as some pretty in-depth philosophical thinking. So think about this content as something that's for educational and informational purposes. Having said that, I'm really pleased that you're here. In today's episode, I want to start with something a teacher said to me a few years ago. She'd been teaching year 9s for about 15 years. She said, "The boys I'm teaching now are different, not in ways I can actually easily articulate, but something's shifted in how they talk about girls, how they talk about sex, how they respond when a female student disagrees with them." Now, she wasn't describing monsters. She was describing a change in the water, a shift in assumptions. Now, in episode 326, I talked about the Manosphere, and there I looked at what those ideologies do to boys in the classroom and what they do to girls and teachers and the whole culture of a school. Now, today I want to go one layer deeper, because underneath the ideology, before the ideology really, there is something more concrete, more intense, more intimate, and more formative. And there is, in that, what boys are actually watching on the internet. And that's online pornography, which is now, for the majority of Australian adolescent boys, the primary source of information about what sex looks like, what women's bodies are for, what men are supposed to do, and what a sexual encounter is supposed to look like. It's not sex education. It's not conversations with parents or trusted adults. It's pornography. And the question I want to sit with today is, what does that actually do? Not in a moral panic sense, not in a way that pretends all pornography is identical or that all exposure produces identical outcomes. It's obviously not the case. But specifically, clinically and with what the research in front of us tells us. So what happens when the primary architecture of a boy's sexual imagination is built on content that was designed as entertainment for adults, and that systematically misrepresents consent, power, gender, and what bodies actually want and need? So as always, let me start with what we know. The Australian data on adolescent pornography exposure is consistent across multiple studies and doesn't leave much room for optimism about the current situation. Research by the Australian Institute of Family Studies and work led by Professor Michael Flood at Queensland University finds that the majority of Australian boys have been exposed to pornography before the age of 13. It's a bit scary. In my day, it was usually when we hit, high school, and one of the boys had found his dad's stash in the garage, and it was sort of whispered. That's not the case anymore. So, a significant proportion by 10 or 11. Okay, so we're now going really into childhood, very much into childhood, pre-adolescent stuff. And exposure at that age isn't incidental. It's formative in a way that later exposure simply isn't, because it's arriving before the viewer has had the relational experience, the cognitive development, or the critical framework to contextualize what they're actually seeing. So what is it that they're seeing? The content that dominates algorithmically is not a natural sample of human sexuality. It's a heavily skewed sample in which particular acts, power dynamics, and representations of women are vastly overrepresented. Flood's research and the broader intentional literature consistently describe content in which women's pleasure is secondary or absent, and in which aggression and coercion are normalized and often eroticized. And it's in that context where the male performer's pleasure and performance are the organizing logic, and in which the bodies are responses of both partners are edited to represent an experience no actual body reliably has. The Office of the E-Safety Commissioner's National Research found that young people themselves identify pornography as their primary source of information about sex. Not their only source, but the primary one. And when they describe what they learn from it, the picture is consistent, that sex is primarily a performance, that women are enthusiastic participants in anything a man wants, that male desire is the driver, and that the version of sex they've been watching is more or less how sex actually looks and works. That last piece is the one that matters most clinically. It's not that boys who watch pornography become predatory. Most obviously don't. It's that their expectations of what sex looks and feels like, what they and their partners are supposed to do, and what constitutes normal sexual experience get calibrated to a template that was never accurate. And that is, in many cases, directly harmful. La Trobe University's work on sexual health and relationships in Australia adds another layer to this. Young women consistently report experiencing sexual encounters in which their partners seem to be following a script, doing things that's seen rather than responding to an actual person, expecting responses that weren't forthcoming, being confused or frustrated when reality didn't match the template. And this is not primarily a story about predatory men. It's a story about young men who were educated by content designed to be arousing rather than accurate, and who arrived at real intimacy with a map that doesn't correspond to the territory. The concept I want to introduce here comes from the sociologists John Gagnon and William Simon, who developed what they called sexual script theory in the 1970s. It's really interesting stuff. The idea is straightforward. Sexual behavior isn't purely instinctive. It's learned. We absorb largely without conscious awareness scripts about how sexual encounters are supposed to unfold, who initiates, who responds, and what each person is supposed to do and want and feel, and how the interaction progresses and concludes. These scripts are cultural products. They vary across time and place. And, interestingly, they are remarkably durable once they're established. The reason that sexual scripts are so sticky is partly neurological and partly developmental. Forgive the pun. Sexual arousal and the content associated with it during formative periods have a particularly strong imprinting effect. Content encountered during early adolescence, when sexual imagination is forming and when the neurological development makes novelty and intense stimulation especially compelling. And it's in that tends to lay it down in foundational ways that later content doesn't. Right? It's highly influential. This is part of why the age of first exposure to pornography really matters. It's not just that the boys are seeing something they're not ready to contextualize. It's that they're seeing it at the developmental moment when it's most likely to be formative. Now, apply this to the specific content that algorithmically served pornography delivers. The script it teaches, and to summarize it precisely, male desire is central and legitimate. Female desire is responsive to male desire, not independent of it. Consent is assumed or irrelevant to the script's progression. The male performer's experience is the organizing logic in this. Women's reaction confirm male performance rather than expressing authentic response. That's the script. And it gets practiced in imagination thousands of times before a boy has his first ever real sexual encounter. And this is where the arc of this season connects directly. In the intimacy episode, we talked about the way men who conflate sex with intimacy approach relationships, looking for confirmation of performance rather than genuine contact with another person, looking to be seen rather than to know. The pornography-formed script is the training ground for exactly that pattern. It teaches boys neurologically and culturally that the other person in a sexual encounter is primarily a surface on which their desire is confirmed, not a subject, not someone whose experience has equal weight. The two pillars that operate most clearly here are territory and competition. Territoriality, because the pornography script positions women's bodies and responses as belonging to male desire. Competition, because performance and adequacy relative to other men, relative to the performers in the content, become the evaluative framework for that encounter. The question underneath both of these is the same one we've seen driving the body image crisis. The health-seeking gap, the loneliness epidemic. Am I enough? And the script pornography provides answers that question by making the other person's autonomy irrelevant to the answer. Now, I want to name something I think is underappreciated in the way we talk about this in general. Pornography and the manosphere aren't parallel phenomena. They're integrated ones. The manosphere didn't create the pornography-formed sexual script, but it provides the ideological framework that makes that script coherent and justifiable. It takes what boys are watching and turns it into a worldview. The Manosphere's sexual market value framework, which we've touched on in earlier episodes, provides an economic rationale for exactly the script pornography teaches. Women are resources to be acquired. Sexual access is a reward for sufficient male value. Consent is transactional, not intrinsic. What pornography shows as a visual template, the Manosphere provides as a philosophical justification. Together they produce something more durable than either alone. A man who has both an imaginistic template and a theoretical framework for treating sexual encounters as performances of acquisition rather than as meetings between two people with equal standing. Now, Michael Flood's work on young men and pornography in the Australian context makes the point worth emphasising. The men most likely to hold harmful attitudes about sexual consent are not simply those with high pornography consumption. They are those with high pornography consumption combined with peer cultures that endorse and discuss pornography in approving terms. The ideology becomes the amplifier. The content alone is damaging in specific ways. The content plus a peer culture that normalizes it and a manosphere that provides its intellectual framework is something that is considerably more serious. This is also where the schools data from episode 326 connects. The teachers describing changes in how boys talk about girls and observing the surface expression of this integrated formation. The boy who tells a female classmate she should be grateful for male attention, who responds to a girl's academic achievement with contempt or derision, who circulates sexualized images of female peers, he's not acting randomly. He's acting from a script that has been forming since he was 10 or 11, in his bedroom, watching content that told him female bodies are performances or territories for male consumption. And in online communities, that told him this was simply how reality works. Now, it's not just female peers. There's been growing problems with teenage boys and how they relate to female teachers. And the more patriarchal the context, the worse that is. And the girls in those classrooms are also navigating the outcomes. The Latrobe research on young women's sexual experiences in Australia is unambiguous. Girls and young women are reporting higher rates of unwanted sexual experiences of pressure, and encounters in which their expressed preferences were overridden, and it's worse than in previous generations that we know of. This is not a coincidence. It's the relational downstream of the script that boys are being trained in. And I use that word very deliberately. Trained in. Now, I don't want to leave this episode in a state of pure diagnosis. That's not what I want to do. So let me be specific about what the research suggests actually works and what doesn't. What doesn't work is abstinence-based messaging about pornography. Don't watch it. And we know that this hasn't worked, and it probably won't. By the time a conversation like this is happening with an adolescent, the script has usually already been formed. And even before exposure, shame-based messaging produces boys who watch pornography in secret and have no framework to process it, rather than boys who don't watch it. What the evidence does support is something much more specific. Media literacy education that treats pornography as a genre with conventions, production values, and purposes. In the same way we teach a young person to read advertising critically. The goal is not to produce boys who have never seen pornography. The goal is to produce boys, to raise boys who understand that what they're watching is, a constructed product that misrepresents reality and have different framework for thinking about what the real sexual encounters involve. The Australian study by Flood and colleagues found that the media literacy programs delivered before the onset of heavy pornography consumptions, so in the late primary school and early secondary school, have measurable effects on boys' attitudes about consent, gender equality, and what sex actually involves. The programs that work are direct. They name pornography explicitly. They treat boys as capable of engaging with difficult material honestly. And what doesn't work in this context is a bleak, euphemistic content that pretend boys aren't already watching. Now, for parents, the research is similarly specific. The conversations that make a difference are not one-time talks. They are ongoing, normalized patterns of engagement with what boys are seeing online and what they think about it, what questions it raises. Parents who've established that pattern before adolescence have considerably more influence over how their sons process what they encounter than parents who attempt a single intervention at 13. The timing matters. The relationship matters more. And for men in general, including the men listening to this, we're not outside this picture. The pornography script that forms boys' sexual expectations is the same script that most of us absorb to some degree. Remember the stash in the garage. The question is not whether it affected us. The question is whether we've examined it honestly enough to know where it's operating and whether we're willing to do that examination. Because the alternative to the pornography script isn't an absence of sexuality. It is a sexuality grounded in the same thing we've been talking about all season: genuine recognition of the other person. The question that McKay poses in the broader relational context applies here too. Not who am I in this encounter, not how do I perform in this encounter, but who are we? Two people, each with their own experience, their own desire, their own body, that communicates something real. Now that's not a platitude. That is a fundamentally different sexual script from the one pornography installs. It is learnable, but it has to be taught explicitly and early before the default scripts get so deeply established that it takes serious therapeutic work to examine. And this is really important. This is what we owe boys, not protection from the reality that pornography exists, but enough respect for their intelligence and their future to actually talk about it. So let me round it up. This has been Inspired Change with me. The Patreon exercise for this episode asks you to examine the sexual script you actually carry, where it came from, how it operates, and what a different one might look like in practice. So I'll see you there. Come to the Patreon workroom. Until next time, stay curious, stay honest, and keep doing the work. You know, on this show, we talk a lot about living with purpose, slowing down, paying attention, and being intentional about the choices we make every day. Because when we simplify the noise around us, we can better hear what really matters: empathy, connection, and showing up as the best version of ourselves. That's why I'm genuinely pleased to welcome our newest sponsor, Distill Union. Their philosophy aligns beautifully with what we do here. Distill Union creates slick, thoughtfully designed essentials: wallets, key organizers, phone cases, all built with a less is more approach. Their Wally wallets, Ferris key organizers, these are everyday tools that make life easier, cleaner, and calmer. In that simplicity, there's space for clarity, there's space for change. As a thank you to our Inspire Change community, they're offering 20% off any product with the promo code Inspire Change. Have a look, try them out, and see how simplifying your day can open the door to something deeper. Visit distillunion.com and enjoy 20% off any product with the promo code Inspire Change. That's distillunion.com with promo code Inspire Change to check out.
Hello to all our listeners. We thank you for tuning in and supporting positive social change, which makes you a part of Gunter's efforts in transforming not only men's lives, but lives in general. And we are grateful that you have joined us. We want to extend a huge thank you to our listeners in Los Angeles, Berkeley, and Van Nuys. After California dropped to number 5, you brought your state back up to number 2 on the top 10 USA listeners list. And to our global listeners, we extend our gratitude to our listeners in Dublin for bringing Ireland up to number 15 on our global listeners list. Congratulations! You made it to the top listeners list. I, Devonna Prinzi, the co-executive producer, and our showrunner, Miranda Spigner-Sapone, sincerely thank you and ask that you please take the time to like, follow, subscribe, and share, as your efforts make a difference to everyone here at Inspire Change with Gunter. If these stories resonate with you and you would like to engage more with Gunter and the Inspire Change team, please consider joining our Patreon community, where our members find bonus content and early access to video episodes. Membership awaits at patreon.com/Inspire Change. That's patreon.com/INSPIRECHANGE. As always, thank you to each and every one of our listeners. And most importantly, please keep inspiring positive social change.
Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com.